Dean here with Escape to Gaming. Today I want to talk about what constitutes retro. And in the retro community, do we have a monopoly on what we consider retro, and that we're the arbitrators of what's retro and what's not? And is it relative? Is it relative to where we are in time? Is it relative to the existing hardware and the ability to play the games? This is kind of like the staple of my channel. Is I'm one of the oldest gamers out there. I haven't met anyone yet on the internet that's any older than me. Steve Benways was born in 1968. I'm born in 1962. So I'm one of the older gamers that I know. There's probably much older gamers than me. Certainly the wonderful designers of Doom and Wolfenstein 3D and many of these games are even older than I. They're kind of like my mentors that I grew up with. Were the early pioneers of PC gaming and just gaming in general. The guys that invented vector graphics and the vector. I remember going to an electronics show with my dad when I was a kid, and they had these vector graphics machines, table-type machines you could look down on. I remember seeing the Vectrex, and I just thought it was like so space-age and so cool. I said, man, this is really neat stuff. Love to have that, but in my mind, it was millions of dollars, and it was unattainable. Like I mentioned in some of my earlier rants, I begged my dad for an Atari 2600 kind of near the end of high school. Now, by the time the Atari 2600 came out, I was ready to get out of high school. So, it's relative. A lot of, and I have other Facebook groups I belong to that are part of these Sega Genesis, retro groups and what have you. And I love them. I belong to several of them. And I get so excited when I see someone that gets a brand new Sega Genesis and they post a picture, hey, look what I just found at a yard sale, and they're so excited. It's their first Model 1 Genesis or their first Super NES, and you can see the enthusiasm, and then they'll say, hey, what games are great? I got these 4 games, are they good games or not? Can you recommend any? So, and I'm not too far from that. I mean, I didn't have this system growing up. I did have a Super NES, but by the time I had my Super NES, I was already an adult. I was, 29 or 30 years old. My first console or system was a Commodore 64. And I was, 27 years old or whatever when I bought it. I mean, it took me forever to save up to buy that first system, and I wanted one. I had a friend that had one years before, and I saw him barnstormer on the C64, and my mouth was hanging open. I'm like, oh, I've got to get one of these. So once I saw the C64, I quickly lost interest in the very rudimentary, simplistic Dodgem and other great games that I love playing at my friend's home on the Atari 2600. The 2600 is a great system, and I would love to have one to this day, just because it's like the thing that I was denied as a kid. I wanted one so bad as I was an older kid, probably 14, 15, 16, 17, maybe in there somewhere, when it first came out. And I went to my friends' homes, like I'd mentioned some of my earliest rants, and just savored playing just a handful of games that we played on it. I only played it, maybe 5 or 6, Atari 2600 games, but they were magical, and those all-nighters at my friends' homes, just for that reason alone. Even if I rarely ever play the games, I got the 2 analog TVs here where I can do it. So I'd like to get an Atari 2600, maybe get a half a dozen games, tops. I'd be happy with that. They don't even have to be popular, collectible games, just games that I liked as a kid at my friends' homes. So it's, for me, nostalgia and what is retro is the fond memories and just the dynamic of looking back with a sense of fondness, or, I guess the word nostalgia is the most popular one. And I just saw this morning, I'm enjoying my coffee, and Mark Vergeer over, I think he's in the Netherlands. I've been recently friends with him the last year or so. Well, he posts some fascinating videos, and he posted one recently which kind of inspired my When They Pull the Plug video. He did a thing was just reading, you could just scrolling words that you read on his YouTube video, and it was all about his frustration with modern gaming and the ability we're not going to be able to download down the road. We may not be able to play the games because they're off from servers, and the constant patches and updates and downloads, and it's problematic. And I love that video. I read that he posted it in Facebook too, the exact same thing. And I saw that, and then this morning he posted another thing. He was doing a VR. I think Novabug did a thing on what constitutes, what's nostalgia, and will, today's games, be looked back on with a sense of fondness, or I guess the world, if you use the word, I guess nostalgia. Will we see these the same way, or with kids today looking back, or my age, or whatever, will we look back someday and this would be considered, let's say, retro? And this is something that's an interesting topic because I just went out the other day and bought for $8. I got a great deal. They had a sale at my Dimple store, so I went down there and they had some other games I wanted, but they were in the $15 to $20 something range. I just couldn't afford them, but I really wanted them. But I did get these. I got I got this wonderful Deus Ex Invisible War. Finally, I've been looking for this, and I got it dirt cheap for a couple bucks. Everything or Nothing 007 and Agent Under Fire. So now I finally have the entire collection of all of the Xbox James Bond games. I got Rogue Agent. I got this wonderful Nightfire. I just love this game. This is one I have played, and this is my favorite of all, which I've played so many times on the PS2 and on the original Xbox from Russia with Love. I love this. So I was so excited. I didn't come to the room. Finally, I realized last night, I go, hey, I finally have the whole Bond collection. So to me, these are retro games to me. I mean, yeah, the system is only, 10 years old or a little older, but they're still retro games. I don't see why they wouldn't be. The PlayStation 2, I mean, we get into stuff like, Manhunt or, Vice City, which I just downloaded on the PlayStation 4. And people have a sense of fondness for those. Those have become classics. Everyone can agree that they're classics, but whether they're actually retro games, I mean, there's a lot of discussion. Some people think it's only, the early gen, the early, like a third gen games, 8-bit and 16-bit games. Those are real retro games. These other PlayStation 2 and Xbox games, these games aren't retro. These are modern games. And I see where it's a frame of reference. It depends, and it's relative to where you are, where you were when you played them. Looking back with them, maybe you don't look back with them with fondness. Maybe in your mind they were just a few years ago, and that's not a big deal. I have many friends, and I just posted this video when the plug is pulled. I did recently, and I talked about this identical dynamic that I love collecting, and thanks to many of my wonderful friends in the retro community, have shared so much of their passion and their love and their technical knowledge of these retro games. I love to watch their hidden gems videos and Metal Jesus. My wife and I were watching a rash of his videos the other night. I discovered I had watched one of his he had done a year or so ago on Xbox, hidden gems. Well, apparently he had more of them, so I watched the rest of them. And look, he's got ones on the PS2 and even the PS3 and the Xbox 360. And to me, they're all worth collecting. I honestly can't see. I can't reposition myself here. My back is just on fire today. I had to work yesterday and I'm in rough shape. But thanks to the wonder of opiates and caffeine, made this rant possible. But anyway, I can't see how this could not become a classic retro game someday. I can't see how Quake 4, or the game Rage, or Wolfenstein from 2009, how they couldn't become wonderful retro classics someday. I don't see how they couldn't. Even, a PlayStation 3 game like this Twisted Metal, even though I didn't care for the story, I loved the challenge mode, and I just have so much fun. It's one of my favorite PlayStation 3 games. If I ever, whittle it down to 3 games for the PS3 to hang on to, this would probably be one of them, because I love it. It has a lot of the retro feel of the early Twisted Metals, but with the state-of-the-art graphics and even more button moves. It's even more complex. This is a long, 4 or 5 hour learning curve on this game. This game is complex and very fun, and a highly underrated gem on what I wouldn't consider the PlayStation 3 or the Xbox 360 to be retro consoles, but I certainly can see the day where they probably will. It's all relative, and I'll explain why. And you can look at, there's many different categories of things that people consider retro. I have an old retro 1950 radio. It still works. I can tune it in. It's hard to get stations on, but it's so cool. I just love the thing. father-in-law gave it to me. He's a repairman on radios. He works like for hospitals and paramedics where they have the walkie-talkies, and he's one of the few people left that knows the technology and how to go in and fix the radio stuff. And so he has a whole collection of these vintage radios. I was thrilled and delighted that he gave me this wonderful retro radio, which I love. I cherish it. I don't need to even turn it on. Just looking at it is enough. So I was just out in my garage this morning and last night working on this cabinet job, trying to wrap it up. And I have a radio out there. I've got a ghetto blaster. And I still listen to FM radio today because I like the classic rock. I like hearing a DJ. It's just more organic. My wife likes Pandora and Spotify and all this stuff. It's just cold. It's like there's no voices. Yeah, you can listen to great high-quality music. It's all digital and everything. And she'll listen to a lot of retro classics and disco and a lot of the pop music that we both love from the 70s and the Carpenters and, all of her Donner Summer stuff. And she has her favorite music and I have mine. I'm more into the classic rock. She's more into the pop music and disco stuff, but I like both. I have a wide, eclectic taste with music. I mean, my wife and I went to see Black Sabbath reunion in 1999, but we just went up recently and saw Joe Satriani and saw a dubstep band, Bass Nectar, at a huge rave. I was like the oldest, my wife and I were the oldest people there. I kind of got embarrassed. This was the first time in my life I realized that I really am getting old. But to me, I like the old stuff and the new stuff. I can listen to Vivaldi and Franz Liszt 1 minute and listen to King Diamond and Sabbath and the Doors the next. I have an eclectic taste in music. I don't like all genres of music, but I like quite a few of them from the old and the new. So I'm one of the few people that sees it, and I'm still like a big kid because I was kind of denied a rough childhood. My dad gave me the kick out the door at 17. That said, get the fuck out. And that was it. That was on my own. So there was I didn't have, parents buying me cars and toys and new Xbox 360s and every Christmas getting every toy and every system I wanted. I didn't have it. So I'm envious of a lot of you guys that were younger and with your Saturday morning cartoons, when you were done with that and your bowl of, Fruit Loops, you'd sit down and you could play your favorite games, after your cartoons or whatever. And that's why have fond memories of these old systems and games, because that was part of your ingrained in your childhood. For me, it's looking back at my old Tyco and AFX HO scale slot card tracks. That was where I was at, long before there was even really video games were very prevalent. Very few people had them that I knew. And so we had electric train sets and slot card tracks, and even those are becoming very cool and retro today. Unfortunately, I got rid of an enormous setup. I could have probably sold it for thousands today. I had an enormous, took me years to build it up, and I got to the point where I was just like into what's new and got rid of everything. So I embrace the new things, but I'm still got one foot back, in the old days too. And that's why I love this retro community, because what's funny is that it's all about retro, and a lot of these people, they hate modern stuff and computer games and the new consoles. And I have no love for this Xbox 360, and certainly not the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One and all that. And believe me, I validate many of your frustrations. I feel I'm on the brink of jumping off the stern of the Titanic right before it goes under the waves right now with consoles the way it is. I'm concerned about the future of them. That was in my pull the plug rant I just did a week or so ago. That was why I'm very concerned about preserving many of these newer 7th gen games and systems and stuff. Because, and in most of these you can play. You can play all of these even without patches and servers. They seem to play fine. I think if you have a big enough hard drive, and someone actually saw that video and said, Dean, there's you can put a 2 terabyte external hard drive to an Xbox 360 now and back up all your Xbox games, 150 odd games. And I'm like, wow, that's really cool. I didn't know that. So thank you for, I forget who it was. Someone put it in my the comments, a link to it, or mentioned it, and I immediately went on, and sure as hell, I found some stuff on YouTube and the internet to support that. Just recently, a year or so ago, Microsoft extended the 32 gigabyte cap for external hard drives. Now you can put a USB thing in there, or a computer backup, and you can back up all the games, which is exciting to me, because I see the day where these will become retro games, just like I see the PlayStation 2 and the original Xbox is retro today. I think that we've got to be careful we don't become conceited and arrogant in our opinions that, oh, that we have the retro, the fifth and the fourth and fifth gen, or 16-bit, 32-bit. That's retro. I mean, we own nostalgia. No one else will have the good times that we had. I just don't see that. And maybe that's because I love both so much. I can give you another analogy. When I was in high school, now not only could I not afford, my parents wouldn't buy me a Commodore 64, they wouldn't get me an Atari 2600 or anything like that. They certainly weren't going to buy me an automobile for my first car at 16 like many of my friends. My parents couldn't afford to send me to a private school, but we had a wealthy doctor, a friend of my dad's, that sponsored my sister and I, so we could go to expensive private Christian schools, and one of them was even a boarding school, which I stayed at in high school. So it was funny because I was kind of juxtaposed with all these rich kids who they were 16 and a half years old. Their dad went out and bought them a brand new Z28 Camaro, brand new Mustang Fastback, brand new Ford van with a groovy shag carpet and the little round windows in the back, and so I saw, and there were other kids that were kind of poor and did yard work and stuff, and they had a beat up muscle car with primered fenders and thrash, bird picked up, vinyl top that's all coming up on it. Had old cars from the 50s and 60s. So you had a wide range of cars. So I got into car stuff real early, even though I couldn't afford one. I was obsessed with cars. I had every car magazine. I studied them. I learned to work on my friends' cars and drive with them. I even saved while at home at 17. I saved my money up in a whole year to buy a 68 Ford Torino GT. It had a 4-speed. I think it had a 302 in it. It was like kind of a avocado green metallic with a black vinyl top and black stripes. I knew the guy that owned it, and he said he'd save the car for me and I could buy it. Well, I lovingly saved up the money for like 9 months living at home, and I begged my dad, let me buy this car. I won't ask you for a dime. No, I wouldn't trust you with a 35mm camera, let alone a car. No, not under my roof. Okay. So my dad and I were like butting heads and locking horns around that time. That's finally, he told my mother, pack his bags, he's out of here. I don't want him here anymore. And I had to survive on the street. So I had to forgo a lot of my childhood in the way of, gaming and even cars and stuff. I was just like in a survival mode, living from friends' home to home. I could stay at this home for so long and then move to this one. Stay with this relative, and then something would happen, I'd have to move again. And so I had a rough childhood, and that transition from childhood to adulthood ramped up real fast. I had to grow up fast. So a lot of this, the gaming stuff was on hold, but what I had to do is I had to get to work. So I did save up and eventually bought my first car. In fact, what I did is I gave the money I saved up for that Torino, I gave it to my best friend. He bought the car because he loved it. And then he paid me back over the course of the next 6 months. And then I'd get to cruise with him in his car. So I would always find a creative, resourceful way around it until I could get my first car, which was a 4-door 1970 Chevelle. I wanted a nice 2-door one, but I only paid, I think, $350 for that car, which back then you could. For a few $100, $200, $300, $400, $500, you can get nice cars all day long that were very reliable and nice, So, and then a little later, I got a 74 Maverick 2-door that had a 302 in it, and I loved that. It was a Maverick Grabber, orange with black stripes, and I jacked it up with these big meats in the back, and I learned to work on that car, and I love cars. I've had 87 cars since I was a kid now. So, but back then, what was interesting is that the cars that we considered really cool were based on relative to who we were at the time in high school. In high school, like I said, some kids had brand new, Corvettes, or parents would buy them very expensive cars. Or they'd have a new Toyota, Celica, which, back in 79 or 80. Or like I said, Camaros and Mustangs, a lot of the nicer, kind of sporty, hardtop, fastback type cars. And I envy those kids. I kind of was into the more what was considered retro cars, which were the old 60s cars, the old, Dodge, Plymouth Belvederes that had 413 wedge engines, and the old 426 Hemi cars, Plymouth Furies, Sport Furies, and I loved the 57 Chevy and the 55 and 56 Chevy. Eventually I did have a 55 Chevy Bel Air, but it wasn't until just, a little over 10 or 12 years ago I finally got one. It was more of an investment, and then I had to sell it. I never actually drove the car. I didn't run when I had it, but it was I got a good deal on it, and I made a fortune off it when I sold it. Now those cars are worth, God, you could buy a house for what those cars cost. But at the time, that's what I was in. It was considered like the retro type cars. And so I'd kind of hang out with my friends in that kind of the retro car community. And we only liked 60s and 50s cars. And we looked at the newer 70s cars, which had very low horsepower engines. It's just like, well, look at these poor, dolts. Kind of like the way the PC gamers look down at the console peasants. Kind of the same kind of, attitude. We thought we had the killer cars with the high horsepower motors, and a brand new Trans Am in 1978 was only barely 200 horsepower, and we were driving 400 plus horsepower Dodge Challengers and Chargers and Mustangs and Mavericks and things like that on the street and having a lot of fun. So it was relative to what we considered cool and retro. And then growing up into the 80s, I had dozens and dozens of these classic muscle cars. Today I could retire if I had those cars. Today, literally, the rest of my life I'd have enough money. My 69 Charger RTSE, it was one of 2,100 made. Those start at like 70 grand and up now. And I bought that car for $2,200 in 1987. It's crazy. I have a friend of mine on Facebook. He's a younger guy, works at In-N-Out Burger over in Las Vegas, Nevada. But he lives at home with his mom. But he loves cars. He reminds me of myself because he always has 2 or 3 cars going at once. He buys an old beater. He fixes it up. He's a really good mechanic. He puts new brakes and cleans it up and touches up the scratches and replaces the door panels. It's just enough to make it look decent. And then he doubles his money on it. He's done this with so many cars. I've known him for a few years now. Well, his goal was to buy a 69 Charger, but now they're worth like 20 to 50 grand. They're just insanely expensive. But they're big retro cars. And it kind of reminds me of retro gaming in a way, because eventually the games are going up and up and up. And there's Super NES games I'd love to have that I had at the time. Or I don't know if I could justify spending $100 and something per game, or $300 per game, or $600 for a Sega Genesis or Super NES game. I mean, luckily, most of the games that I want for that Super NES, which I don't have any yet, are relatively affordable. I can afford to buy most of them, not right now, but there are games I could buy for $25 or $50 a pop, which is not too bad. I consider. I know it's a little pricey compared to a couple of years ago, but it's doable. This Return Fire, which I had given to Mark Bustler, I mentioned this before. When I wanted to look this up, there was only one available in the original tall box, $350. I go, you're kidding me. This was like a title no one could care less about at the time. It was only in the tall box. I never made a greatest hits of it. It was in a Panasonic 3DO as well, and then it was gone. Well, I'm so happy I got this back. That was the one game, once I realized what it was, I kind of sheepishly asked Mark, after the dozens of things I've donated, I said, dude, do you think I could have that Return Fire game back? Because I wanted him to review it. CGR Undertow reviewed it. He said he didn't have time. He goes, well, because if you can wait a year or two, I said, I'll probably get to that game, but if not, I'd be more than happy to send it back. I said, just that one game, only because I couldn't afford to buy it now, and it means so much to me. So he generously sent the game back, and thank God I have it. This would be a rare game for me. It's an expensive game, a cherished game in my collection. But, getting back to the cars, what was funny is that back in the 80s, in the mid-80s in particular, when I had all of these I had two 69 Chargers, 270 Dodge Challengers, 1970 Buick Grand Sport convertible with an aluminum heads, factory heads, and 4-speed. That car would be worth 50, 60 grand now today. I get hit by a kid who didn't have insurance, and the insurance gave me like $4,500 for it. I just said, wow, I only paid $1,500 for this car. I just made a fortune of it. So to me, those cars were just cars. They were just old cars and retro cars, kind of like people that had collected retro games probably in the last 5 to 10 years when you could buy them dirt cheap. You didn't think anything of it. Now all of a sudden you're realizing what Chrono Trigger and a lot of these games are going for. And it's like, oh my God, I should have bought that game years ago, or shouldn't have got rid of it, or hung on to it, or shouldn't have traded it. And I'm seeing this as so many games. There's only a couple that I want that are kind of pricey, that I may have to pay the big bucks, and I'm nervous about it, but I'll do it if I have to, because I really want those games. I may not even play them that much, but because of nostalgia, I want to look back fondly. To me, that's why I love this gaming room that I have here. It's small, but I can look at the games, and many of them I had at one time, and each time I look at the box, it reminds me of a period in my life where I had fun. Now, I wasn't a kid when I played all these games. I was probably in my 40s, early 40s by the time I played this. But I have friends that have played this. I've watched reviews of people that were very young that played this. Yeah, I remember this 007 game. I'd come home from school and play this with my friends and loved it. I can't even relate to that. But it's nostalgic for people. So to me, this is retro. It's as retro as can be. Like I said, I wouldn't say it so much about the Xbox 360 yet. It's going to take more time. I think it takes at least 10 years for any car to become even partially collectible, or any video game system. And that's it. Like I said, it's the same thing with the cars. I mean, what's funny is all those muscle cars that I had, I was starting to say, I'm all over the map. I'm just exhausted. I haven't slept very good lately, but is that a lot of people in little Beamers and lawyers and Wall Street types would pull up next to me in their Porsches and Mercedes and Beamers and give me the finger, give me a look of disapproval because of this, ugly, gas-guzzling muscle car that was so obnoxiously loud and in your face with its bright colors and the whole deal. But what's funny is all these Wall Street types now, those are the big cars to have. You watch Jay Leno and these wealthy guys in the garage. They could easily afford the best Ferraris and Lamborghinis, but they'd much rather drive their 70 SS Novas in their Yenko, Camaros and all this stuff, and from the late 60s and early 70s, and the SS Chevelles and all those cars I had and took for granted. Those have become the big retro cars. And for the sake of nostalgia, a lot of those older guys were in high school and had those cars when they were new. To me, I was out of high school and was like a young adult by the time I could afford to have and buy and really soup up those cars and make hot rods out of them. But now they're like collector portfolio investments. People buy them. I won't even watch those Barrett Jackson auctions. The cars are going for $70,000 to $100,000 and up per muscle car. And to restore them costs $20,000 to $100,000. I mean, I can't afford that anymore. I've restored mine. In the old days, I'd buy them cheap, and I would do all the work myself. I put the motors in myself, the transmissions. I grind all the paint down to bare metal and then etch the metal and put the epoxy primer and redo it. It was a form of love. I see a lot of that in the retro community today. The guys that know, like my friend Clint, that knows how to go through and clean and fix these old systems and then convert them to stereo, or hook them, make them, convert them to where they can play on, S-video and stuff like that. I think it's fascinating. I envy the guys that know, they're techie guys that can go in and rip a computer apart and go through it and fix it, or an old Commodore 64 Amiga. I don't know how you guys do it. It's fascinating. I have the utmost respect for that kind of knowledge. I don't understand all the emulation stuff and the ROMs and where they come from. Is it legal? Is it not legal? Do they work better than the original hardware? I don't know a lot of it, but I respect the retro community that loves and does know that information, and I'm learning from you guys. I mean, a lot of it. So, to me, I think it's all relative. I think that it really doesn't matter. I think that if you have a fondness, whether as a child or a young adult or even an old man, looking back and playing these games, and you look back with a sense of fondness, or you could use the word nostalgia looking back at them, I think it's a good thing. I think that it's all relative. And I see the day's going to come, because whether we like it or not, 5 years, 10, 15, 20, 30 years is going to go by, and who are we to say that these won't become retro classic games? That people are going to look, remember Burnout Paradise 20 years ago? God, that was the shit. We played the hell out of it. Now, you may not be able to play the multiplayer, but who knows? Maybe in the future there'll be some new technology to where you'll be able to play these games in an HD type setting on newer hardware. I mean, nothing surprises me anymore. Technology is changing and shifting, so I'm always hopeful. Like I said, I'm kind of like, I feel like I'm on the edge of the Titanic is going down. I don't like the direction it's going. Like I've said so many times, with server-based games, this new Rainbow Six game, I boycott it because it's temporary. The new Need for Speed reboot, I boycott it. It's temporary. We're not going to be able to play any of those server games, so I won't even waste the time even buying them. I don't even want to play them. I've had friends, oh, Dean, just enjoy them like seasonal fruit, and just enjoy them today. I don't want to, because what if I like the game, and someday I want to look back on it? Hey, remember that Need for Speed game? And then I won't be able to play it? That will be sad. That's why I have, a $75,000, DVD and Blu-ray and VHS collection. It's enormous, with over 5,000 movies and many more TV shows and DVD box sets, because I love film and I love cinema and I love television. And my memories of watching, lately my wife and I are going through every season of All in the Family. It's a classic American TV show. This is probably the third time that we've sat and watched every single episode, starting the first season to like the 9th season. And I love them. I can't imagine not having them. Now you can watch some of these. You can watch on Netflix. Some of the shows, or they're streamed here and there on cable TV. But we don't have cable TV. I don't care about that. We do watch Netflix, and I enjoy it. But usually I'll just use Netflix for newer movies. And then if I like the film, I'll go out and I'll buy a DVD or a Blu-ray of it. We'd start to watch TV shows like Breaking Bad after a few episodes of it. Now this is a show I can get into. So I said, let's not watch anymore. I just go out and I'll just buy the whole DVD box set, because I can see it's something that's lasting. The Sopranos was another one. I never watched them when they were on TV. It wasn't until just a couple of years ago, and I started to watch them on Netflix, and I go, oh, I want to own this one. This is worth having, because someday, 10 years from now or 20 years from now, I'll want to watch this again and again. It may not be available to be streamed. Who knows? So that's why I don't like too much technology that's like here today, gone tomorrow, like a Bic lighter, use it for a while and throw it away. I like things that are here to stay. And collecting games, to me, is where it's at. Physical games. And I know there's controversy over, someone said that Game of Thrones, on the new Xbox One or whatever, it's completely off a server. You really don't own the game. You buy the disc, but you still have to download the game. So the disc is really like a key. And I don't know how that all works. I don't know. Last night I downloaded The Deadly Tower of Monsters for $15 off the PlayStation Store. It looks like a delightful game with like this 50s, 60s sci-fi elements. It's so cool. Now it's an indie title. It's a small little game. It's $15 for like indie titles or Trials Fusion, Trials Evolution. Those games I love to have, I have some of the older Duke Nukem games off Xbox Live Arcade. Those are the kind of games that I like to have in my hard drive. I would like to have them on disc, but I don't lose sleep over it because I still have the games preserved. It's a great little game. I prefer to have it on disc, but at least I can have it on my hard drive. But most AAA games I prefer to have on disc. And the bigger games I really only buy on disc. I won't do the digital. I have a couple, like Need for Speed, Hot Pursuit. Like I said, I bought my 320 gig Xbox 360 hard drive. That game and one other one, came on there, or you could download the code and get the entire game. So I did, and I gave Mikey when I gave him my Xbox 360 Elite from 2009. I gave him a couple of my Need for Speed games, which I had in the 360 because I had those games backed up in my new hard drive. But I'll probably still rebuy those games back just to have them on disc, just in case if something ever went on my Xbox 360, I could buy a new one and still put the new disc in and have it. But now that I know I can back up these new systems, I'm really excited about that. So to me, it's all relative. It's very subjective, and it's all going to take time. Like I said, I've lived for over a half a century. I've seen so many trends come and go with music. I've seen, and everyone thinks that their generation's music is the generation because that's where they were happiest, in their 20s, high school, college days. So the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and Doors, and that's where they were at that time. That's where they're happy. I have other friends that grew up with A Flock of Seagulls and Simple Minds and the Thompson Twins and, Culture Club. And for them, that's their music they grew up with in school and high school. My wife likes more of the 80s type music. I kind of prefer the 70s, but I love the 80s. And then the 90s, I mean, you get Nine Inch Nails and Alice in Chains and Stone Temple Pilots and so many great bands, and I love those bands too. So I can appreciate each and every culture and their music. Doesn't mean I like every genre of music, but I can appreciate it and I can respect it. It really is relative to where you were at that time and place in your 20s or 30s or, usually your youth. It's not to say that you can't. So I'm establishing now. I mean, today I'm playing new games now. I'm playing, Far Cry 4. I'm playing things like Fallout 4. And I'm building new memories. I could look back with nostalgia and fondness easily. 10, 20 years and look back. God, I remember that 140-hour marathon when I was laid up and, my back in pain and laying on the couch and playing that day after day. And so why wouldn't I want to collect that game? Why wouldn't I? Why couldn't that be just as retro nostalgic as any of these older games that we cherish today? That's really what this little rant was about. I get frustrated when I hear that people say the PS2 and Xbox is not retro. It always kind of bothered me because to me it's old enough to be retro. And a lot of the little handheld systems and other older systems, and I'd still like to get a GameCube. I've always wanted one. I don't know anything about like the Sega Saturn. I'm fascinated that my friends in the Sega community, I love the Sega system. As a graphic artist and a visual person, I love these 16-bit systems. I love them. And I certainly love the 32-bit games as well. So to me, I'm fascinated with the development of graphics over the years and how far we've come. And at that time, when I played all these games, like I said, most of them, I was an adult, my late 20s, early 30s. When the PlayStation 1 came out, I was 32 years old. So to me, my memories and looking back and what I consider retro is based on being like a big kid as a young adult. And I couldn't wait to get home and play my PlayStation 1 and play Duke Nukem Time to Kill or Twisted Metal 2 or, Loaded or Alien Resurrection. So many great games I loved in those systems. They're all retro to me. Anytime you look back with fondness at something 10 or 20 years, that's retro. I don't sit and have hard lines. Retro begins here and then argue with people. It doesn't matter. It's all subjective and it's all good. So thanks for watching this long-winded rant. It's something I think about all the time. I want to preserve, believe me, these newer games. I'm not investing in collecting all these games to just throw them away because they're here today, gone tomorrow. And I know the arguments here, Dean, the lasers and the hardware, it's not going to hold up. You won't be able to play them. Well, the fact is that now that I'm playing my PS4 more, I'm not playing the 360 as much. Since it's a brand new 360, and since I'm going to get another backup PS3 and Xbox 360, even if the lasers go and the thing stops working, it's okay because I'll have backup hardware to play the games on. So that's why I did that when the plug is pulled rant. I can't stress the importance enough. If you have any love and affinity for today's games or last gen's games, they're cheap, dirt cheap to buy. Buy them and buy the hardware. They're cheap. You can go out and get an Xbox 360e with a 500 gig hard drive for $160, slightly used now. They're just so cheap. There's no reason why we can't preserve our favorite games, and it will all be retro and just as nostalgic, the games that we're playing right now today. So I don't think anyone has a monopoly on nostalgia or on retro. I think in the end it's all relative and it's all good. So thank you for watching, guys. I appreciate it, and enjoy your games, modern, retro, PC, or console. It's a wonderful world that we live in, that we can enjoy it all, and thanks to the modernness of the internet, we can even find all of these old retro games and information on them, which is just so wonderful. It never ceases to amaze me. So thanks for watching.